Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. We are really excited for the conversation today and excited that you could all join. We're going to kind of dive right into it here. And our topic for today is data recipes. And, this idea that customers in today's kind of modern go-to-market are expecting to be able to use a number of different go-to-market signals and apply those across their advertising campaigns in a really flexible, nimble way. So some of you may have known one of the drivers behind this conversation was Bombora's launching of our curated ecosystem audiences. And that's a program that asked us to work with companies like G2 and Crunchbase, HG, Definitive Healthcare, and others that have access to this really powerful account level data and to make that data available in a much more flexible way for digital advertising programs. So we have G2 as part of the conversation today to talk about this kind of movement in the market where customers are expecting to get access to these data signals, kind of where they want, when they want, how they want, and how they're starting to see customers use those signals across the digital landscape. We're also really excited to have Reddit joining us as a big partner of Bombora's and G2, where a lot of these signals are getting applied for targeting. And of course, we're having our awesome partner at Just Global, who helps customers activate these signals across a number of media channels. So with that, hopefully a good preamble, we're going to start to invite on our great guests. I'll have Christy from Just Global take the stage with us here. Hey, Christy.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Very excited to be here today talking about the Bombora G2 Reddit products, such as the curated ecosystem. I'm Christy Derby-Strauss, VP of Omnichannel, which covers programmatic, social, direct. We'll talk more about it, but we all know those channels. It's so important to stitch them all together, and having them under one house is something that's been very important to Just Global. I got my start on the DSP side, spent about 10 years in the agency world after that, and about the last 4 B2B specific. So really excited to have the conversation today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining. We're excited. Love to invite Kevin Mallon from Reddit on as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So good to be here. Great to see everyone. I lead all of our ecosystem partnerships here at Reddit. So all of the ad side partners that plug into the Reddit platform one way or another. I've been at Reddit now for a few years, coming up on 3 years. Got my start in the ad space on the social side, working for an FMP, spent a few years at TikTok, building out some of the products. And for the last few years, we've been building out our ecosystem partners. So B2B has been a focus for us the last year or so, and we're looking forward to 2026 and beyond and excited to continue to grow and scale. It's an exciting time to be at Reddit.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And finally, last but not least, Christine from G2.
Hey, folks. Good to meet you. Thanks for having me on, Mike. I'm
Sure.
Christine Lee. I lead our global partnerships and data solutions line of business at G2. And what we do is we look for partners like Bombora and Reddit to really bring the maximum value of our solutions to life. I am a career marketer. I've been in B2B tech marketing space for 2 decades, which is hard to admit. And I've been privileged to see the changes in buyer behavior, the rise of digital media, and now the rise of AI and LLMs really shake up the industry. So super excited about today's conversation because as marketers, we have more access to data than ever before, but at the same time, there's also more noise than ever. So really looking forward to sharing some recipes and insights with Christy and Kevin.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining. We're really excited, and we can kind of just dive right into it here. There's, yes, way more data, way more signals, but hopefully we're doing a good job as an industry making those signals actionable for, kind of nimble campaign deployment. So I'd love for you guys to kind of like dive into that a little bit, talk about how advertisers should be thinking about that. They have access to a bunch of data. What are you seeing as they're starting to access these kind of new flexible signals across campaigns? And yeah,
Totally.
yeah, please.
Sure, I'd love to jump in on that. So I think some of the shifts are pretty nascent, where the audiences, like our clients, are getting a lot more sophisticated in how they look at their audience strategy. But there's also a bit of an unknown, right, on how intent is evolving. So, one thing you're seeing across LinkedIn is intent dead, and how we're having that conversation, and how we're defining it. So there's a lot less of those first party signals. Site traffic is declining. How we're defining those user pools is changing, and content consumption is quickly, becoming much more important and a larger piece of the pie. Also, from an agency perspective, it's on us to understand what's under the hood of the partners that we're working with and how things are being defined, as opposed to just kind of going with, all right, here's a third-party segment. It seems to capture most enterprise clients. Let's go after that and maybe throw a target account list on there. So it's much more broad, where customers are digging into comparison data, where they're starting to consume more information in their buying process. So it's not that access to data, it's understanding how to make the most of the signals that we have, as opposed to being stuck in kind of this direct response. Retargeting is still very valuable, but it's not enough to carry us through. And that's where kind of this data recipe is really interesting to us. And we'll talk more about kind of the ease of access to some of these recipes, because as we know, from an agency perspective, if you've ever done media buying, when you start connecting all these expensive pieces of data, they start to sum up really quickly, and your costs kind of start to outweigh the benefits. So it's really about translating the research behavior and how that can be deployed responsibly.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else have any kind of like firsthand experience with how advertisers are thinking about, deploying the signals they have access to?
Yeah, I can jump in. I love what Christy said about like layering different data signals together in these recipes. I think taking a step back, like the reasons for why we're layering is because buyers are becoming more anonymous. Rise of GDPR, data privacy rules, and also like UGC sites like G2 and Reddit, even LinkedIn. Like there's a really strong members first privacy policy, and where we don't expose who the individual is. Also, it gets really creepy when you do. So we like to keep our sites where it's really focused around behavior that the user is doing. And as buyers are becoming more anonymous, it's becoming more difficult to actually reach the precise visitor. And so we've moved into more of this account-based marketing motion. And now layering on additional signal types and filters really get you to an idea of who your ICP is to go after. I think the second piece is the rise of behavioral and contextual targeting. If you think about how LLMs work, how AI, the direction of AI, where it's moving to, it's all centered around the problem that the buyer is trying to solve. And that all comes down to the behavior they're exhibiting and the context that they're showing this behavior in, right? It's really exciting to me as a marketer, because I feel like we're in this age of renaissance, and where before we had all this data and all the formulaic way to marketing, it was really about just meeting our customers or audience where they are and helping them solve a problem. So I feel like we are returning back to that mantra, and we're trying to solve the problem and use that from behavior and context. And the third trend that we're seeing is the shrinking organic website traffic. As Christy mentioned, like retargeting is great, right? But your retargeting pool keeps shrinking because your organic audience of your website is shrinking. A lot of that comes down to buyer behavior shift, the rise of LLMs. A lot more answers are being addressed through LLMs. And unfortunately, your website is biased. So LLMs don't really care about your website. They care about consensus, what the community and the internet thinks about your brand, right? And that comes from platforms like Reddit and G2, and where we have millions of reviews, millions of users who are debating about your brand and your product. And so really leveraging the audience insights and intent signals from our platforms, as well as the distribution of campaigns and messaging and content in there, is really where you're going to create the biggest influence.
Yeah, that's great. And to kick it to Kevin, I think it's really interesting. Like we've been talking a lot about all of these different signals that customers have access to. And then when they bring some of those signals over to Reddit, Reddit also has just inherent in the way your platform works, all of these amazing opportunities and I'll call them different types of signals. So maybe talk about how customers are thinking about approaching your platform differently than maybe other channels.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And it's really interesting because from the Reddit perspective, particularly for B2B, I mean, given that the Reddit as a platform is still relatively new as an advertising platform, so we've been able to kind of watch some of these trends like unfold sort of in a speed run type fashion, right? Where historically everything was very audience focused, profile focused, and now we're starting to see like a lot more interest in like the signal based targeting as everybody's kind of talking about here. But what's really interesting is on Reddit, we're able to take, these signals that you're getting off the Reddit platform from all of these different sources and starting to combine that with how people are sort of naturally on Reddit in the first place, right? So people come to Reddit to ask questions, discuss problems, and it creates this really rich sort of topic and conversational signal data set. Like Reddit really is this amalgamation of communities and this sort of combination of just conversations ultimately about a whole plethora of different topics. So the opportunity isn't just to add more data into it, it's to figure out how do you want to layer on these signals and meet buyers in the moments where decisions are actually happening in these conversations on the platform. So it's really just a great place to land a lot of this really rich signal that's being generated out in the market.
Yeah, and how do you see customers, advertisers on Reddit balance that notion of like, okay, we have this modern signal infrastructure, so data providers like G2 and Bombora and others can bring those signals onto Reddit and help you target users across the entire platform, versus advertisers saying, hey, I just want to be featured in the conversations that are highly relevant to my solution. How are you seeing advertisers navigate that balance of, call it contextual versus platform wide targeting using these signals?
Yeah, no, like super good question. And it's always this like I feel like it's like an age old dilemma, particularly on like these social platforms of like, do you go really specific or do you go really broad? And there's pros and cons to kind of targeting both ways. Reddit, I actually think it's simple to say, hard to do, of course, but relatively simple in the sense that you want to basically build out build out your ICP, get that rich intent, and then bring it to Reddit and plug into those conversations. And those conversations aren't always going to be, immediately obvious, right? So if you're having a conversation about, or maybe let's say you're trying to, target CRM buyers or whatever the case might be. You're going to be targeting those buyers at sort of the user persona level, but then you're also going to be able to reach those buyers sort of in the conversations that they're having on the platform. So it's going to appear both at the user level, but also sort of contextually across the platform in places that maybe you wouldn't have expected with the ICP and the sort of the signals underlying this ability to target the users across the platform. You're able to kind of get the best of both worlds.
Cool. Yeah, and I think that's a good example of what this idea of data recipes, right? Like what we're seeing is like we all day, every day at Bombora, we get these requests. Somebody's running an advertising campaign, and we respond with our recommended audiences. And maybe a few years ago, there might be 2 or 3 recommendations, and now, and not just us. I think this is everywhere. It's like, hey, there's like 8 or 9 or 10 different ways you could approach solving that problem from a campaign perspective. And with the infrastructure we have, it's like, do them all. It's still the same finite budget. We're not suggesting you spend more than you have, but there's no reason not to deploy all of these strategies and see what's working, because there's just limitless possibilities. And I think the Reddit options are a good example of that. Cool. Well, thank you guys. I think we want to transition into some kind of more tangible examples. And it could be advertisers that we're watching execute things on Reddit. It could be more broad, but would love, Christy, I'll kind of like pick on you to start. Like, what are some tangible examples of advertisers, finding these interesting signals that might not have been so easy to deploy in the past, and bringing something to market with that strategy?
Sure. I think speaking from, a B2B specific agency where we kind of get two main buckets of clients. Some come to us with a really well-defined target account list, but there is a heavily sales influence nature to that list, right? So it's we're motivated to get people from these companies to buy our product. It's not necessarily following the signals that are in market about who's interested in your product. And then we have our kind of more nascent clients that come in that don't necessarily have a well-defined target account list, and we start kind of at square one with them and work with our strategy team, across a number of tools, trying to do our best to stitch together who is doing research on specific topics is typically, where we start, which is a component that Bombora has helped us out with a lot in the past with their surge product, which is kind of where we start. And then, it does start off with a bit more of a limited view when you have just the target account list, where, oftentimes we're evangelizing, let your audience tell you when they're in market for your product or kind of where they are. And this is a bit more of a limited way to do that versus when you're going with who's comparing your specific brand as is part of, the G2 offering and this product. That starts to open up the view a bit more and start to create new demand and kind of increases your user pool and really allows you to scale in places that it's been a struggle to scale in the past. So when we're working with clients that are either heavily sales influenced in how they're going to market versus clients that are really still trying to find their footing, I think this becomes an interesting conversation of target account ABM marketing and how you scale those efforts.
So is it maybe a hot take? You can tell me if this is right or wrong, but in a way, do customers that have a less mature, like hardened ABM list have more opportunity to innovate and try new things and activate new signals? Is that?
I would argue yes, but they also tend to skew more on the branding side when they come to us with that. So it does, kind of allow us to start telling the story from the top level, as opposed to the first scenario or the sales influence. They're typically more demand gen, right? They're typically more dialed in and have like harder benchmarks. So one is going to be probably more performance oriented, but the opportunity exists where you're kind of taking a wider view and then following them down the funnel according to behavior versus telling your audience how they feel about you.
And I imagine it depends on the size of the account list. If it's a customer with a vast addressable market that has a very large list, even though that list is finite, there might be a lot more opportunity to slice it into different buckets based on these different signals like G2 or Bombora or Crunchbase, et cetera. Whereas if you're only starting with 100 key accounts, it might be difficult to get experimental, and it might be just about reaching those 100 accounts.
Absolutely. And I think there are pitfalls with both approaches and just kind of wanting to be conscious of how your budget is spent. But yes, I would totally agree.
Cool. So yeah, Christine, talk a little bit about, like, I know there's all these different kind of like altitudes at which your data set can come together and a bunch of different creative ways that customers can use different cuts of it. So what are you seeing? Like, what are examples of how customers are using it and bringing it into campaigns?
Yeah, I think similar to what Kevin shared about the contextual elements in Reddit and in the depending on the topic that they're interested in, it signals like where they are in the buying stage, right? Similar on G2, depending on their behaviors on G2, for example, are they looking at a specific product page versus a category view of all products and how they rank? That shows different different points of the buyer journey. Are they looking at pricing data? Well, if they're looking at pricing data, they're pretty close to creating a short list, right? If they're doing comparing one product next to their alternative product, like side by side, they're really down their decision-making process. And so we collect those signals and we categorize them by the type of behavior that they exhibit on G2. Based on those behaviors, you can then create different data recipes. I also just want to emphasize what Christy said about the two different types of marketers and how the marketers who don't have a defined list actually have a much larger opportunity. 100% agree there, because you are going by what the buyers are telling you. right? And the signals that they're sending you instead of you having this arbitrary list of accounts that you must win. And understand, like, sales need that. I'm in sales, I get it. But being more opportunistic and starting with, let's say, category level signals, just to understand who's in market, right? G2 is, like, you don't go to G2 for fun. Sorry, but like, you go to G2 with intention to research and to buy. And so the fact that you're on G2, you're showing some level of intent. Now to narrow that further down into, okay, what products are they going to? Or, are they looking at pricing views? Are they looking at competitors? Do you have a customer who's actually checking out alternatives to your product? Those are all different types of signals that deserve a different workflow.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think, okay, G2, we all have our head around the power of the data that emits from G2, right? It's users looking at your product page. But even that, there's a proliferation of signals that could get split into 4 or 5 different strategies. Companies looking at my competitors, companies looking at the category level, companies looking at my specific product, right? These are like 3 different campaigns that you could test using just one data source. And then you proliferate that across the tens and tens of data sources available. The amount of opportunity for testing and iterating is never been more. What about you, Kevin? What are you seeing advertisers do on Reddit?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of like all of the above, right? But like it's always some version of like a very simple but very powerful playbook, right? You take the intent signals from off platform, from G2, figure out what you're trying to do with it, and bring it to Reddit, right? So let's go back to the sort of CRM reference that I made earlier, right? So you take a CRM, you start with research intent signals from places like G2, indicating maybe somebody's in the market for a new solution. You feed those solutions or that signal into Bombora, you get some modeled audiences, you bring those audiences to Reddit. But then what gets really interesting with Reddit is, again, because you've brought them to the place where these conversations are happening, or where these users or where these people are having the conversations about the problem, about the potential solution set they're looking at. They're engaging with pipeline visibility, RevOps tooling, other CRM integrations, whatever the actual use case for the potential sale is. So instead of targeting purely on job title, company profile, or even buyer stage, you're actually able to reach them at whatever you're trying to reach and in the context where they're trying to solve that problem. So it's a really powerful moment to be able to like reach these users wherever you're trying to reach them in your actual journey to the end sale. So you're not just sort of addressing the problem, you're addressing the problem kind of at the right time in the right place, which generally leads to better outcomes.
And Christy, maybe I'll go back to you on this one. Like, help us understand how clients are thinking about all of these different, like, let's say they have a brief and they know what they want to accomplish. And like I was saying before, maybe there's 12 different distinct recipes and strategies they could use. They have finite budget. Do you see clients leaning in and saying like, hey, let's spend and learn? Or is it like, nope, we gotta do our best to pick the 2 or 3 strategies that we think are going to be the most effective? Like, where are clients on that kind of spectrum of experimental versus, just kind of go with what is the most likely to succeed?
Totally. That is a big question. I think there's a lot of things. Sometimes I feel like it varies mostly by the time of year and where they're at in their financial quarter and how close they are to their goals. But I would say it probably skews a bit more to the latter. So the fact that having a data set that not only sounds good and is harvesting all these new intent layers that are out in the market, but actually performs and outperforms a traditional target account list, like that is going to be critical, I think, to getting the foot in the door for a new product versus quite so much leniency or kind of openness to failure of a test, if you will.
Got it. And we were going to save Q&A till the end, but one came in that's relevant to this particular topic or this question, so we'll cover it now. And it's just what metrics marketers should focus on to know if a data recipe is actually improving results. So say, customer wants to sell a CRM solution. We'll use Kevin's example. They're targeting Bombora's intent data. They're targeting G2's intent data. They're targeting companies with that have installed a competitive CRM solution from HG. They're targeting startups that are growing their sales team from Crunchbase, et cetera, et cetera. They're using lots of different data recipes. What are the metrics that those advertisers are looking at to say, well, let's do more of this one and maybe less of that one? And sorry to keep picking on you, but I'll start with you, Christy, because I know you're on the front lines of answering that question.
Sure, absolutely. So I would like to operate under the guise of a well-orchestrated data hygiene type, engagement. So kind of with the ability to make sure you're setting up a test well, you're not launching 1,000 new things at the same time, all of those things considered. It really comes down to, are they looking to see if this tactic is outperforming, a more traditional ABM approach? So if that is the case, I think it's important to look at that kind of dwell time that you're seeing on your site. I do think that the bottom of the funnel metrics that are site analytics related are still really valuable when doing a tactic comparison. I think when you're kind of looking at something like a curated ecosystem audience where it's not as laser focused, if you will, in the way that a traditional ABM tactic would be, it's also helpful to look at direct and organic traffic changes that you're seeing on your site. So things are not going to be as attributable the way that content is consumed and the way research is done, and noticing where those trends are coming in is going to be really important. I do think that from kind of a, ad tech nerd perspective, building audiences that kind of capture consumption behavior in terms of even video completion and all these other, kind of in DSP metrics are going to be important as well to start to dial in and make your users as trackable as possible within the new parameters that exist is also a good approach. So if it comes down to, that tactic to tactic comparison, I want to see what the users are doing when they actually get to the site. And that's going to take a strong analytics team and a strong analytics partner and a sophisticated platform. And if you're looking to kind of understand, is this moving the needle? Am I able to scale in regions I wasn't able to scale in before? And what's the impact? I think those organic and direct trends are very important to monitor, as well as sentiment studies. Sorry, there's a lot of different things we could look at here. But taking a look at how the conversation changes as a result of the advertising you're putting out there. So there's a lot of sentiment studies that exist. The Trade Desk has a great one, but I'm sure there's many others.
Yeah, no, that's great. We see a lot of those as well. I think we've all seen the ecosystem start to adopt the simplest metric of like, hey, first things first, can you tell me which accounts that I reached? With that campaign is just kind of a baseline level of measurement. And we're starting to see on the Bombora side, customers are making more and more use of that exposure data. So even we'll never ignore more tangible metrics, but even if we were to pretend that we will for a second, knowing the accounts that have lots and lots of ad exposure to your brand and to the products you're selling in and of itself is starting to have more and more value in this world where harder to get people on the phone, harder to get people to your site, harder to get people to click on emails. So it's like, hey, if you could at least know, like, here's an account that has seen a lot of your brand. They know who you are. They could be on a sales list just based on that alone. Like when you get them on the phone, they're going to be familiar with your brand. So that's what we're seeing just from like kind of a baseline perspective.
Totally.
And Christine, while we're kind of on this topic, maybe you could talk a little bit about your journey at G2 in making your data available for activation. I know for a long time, LinkedIn was a big partner. And you work with the ABM platforms, you make the data there where there's activation opportunities. But I'd imagine that your customers over time expect more and more activation opportunities. Maybe talk about how you guys approach that.
Yeah, absolutely. Our philosophy is to partner with whoever the category leader is in order to make our data most viable and most usable across different tech stacks. So we are not an activation platform in ourselves. We collect reviews. We are a double-sided marketplace. That's what we serve, right? And our mission is really to be that the most trusted data source in the B2B tech landscape in order to drive these activations. And so we really look to our partners in creating that activation flow. So we first started with the most fundamental ones, which is your CRMs. Getting our data into a system of record was the first priority. And so we partnered with Salesforce, with HubSpot. Next, we looked at different activation modules, starting with ABM platforms and MarTech platforms. So LinkedIn, as you've mentioned, as well as Marketo, etc., other ones out there. And then we also looked into RevTech. So ZoomInfo, SalesLoft, Outreach, all of those are different platforms that you can take our data and create sales workflows out of. Our most recent integration is with Bombora and the curated ecosystem, because I think we're starting to see the market go into is, as we said earlier, there's so much data available out there that sometimes it can get really complex and noisy, right? And rather than making every marketer understand what each signal means and how to interpret and how to create these recipes, we thought of, well, what if we just create an outcome-based model, right? And where instead of worrying about what data slice to include from G2, we're just going to create these audiences, these pre-built audiences to let you know these are accounts that are already in market, and you can use them off the shelf. And I think that's the beauty of our partnership with Bombora, is that Bombora has become that activating layer for us, in where our data is now transformed into audiences. And your robust ID map across the B2B ecosystem is really helpful in delivering our data into multiple different outlets, including Reddit.
That's great. And I do think that kind of like direction and the strategy that you guys have set is lines up with the way that buyers will over time come to expect to access data. And you can see it already starting to happen. It's like, I just want to use that stuff. I want to use it now. I have a thing I want to use it for. Let me use it. Whereas like it used to be like a, protracted, lot of friction. So I think like what you guys have done is a good example of like, hey, let's make it for this particular use case simpler for a customer to activate the data. Well, this is great, guys. I think we have one more topic here, and that is kind of how, and Christine, you touched a little bit on this already, how customers are using these signals across multiple channels. And then we can talk more about, I got another couple of questions coming in on measurement that I think will also be relevant to this topic. But Christy, maybe I'll start with you. It's like from the seat you guys have, it's a little bit, Christine has a data set, she helps make it available. Kevin has an amazing channel, he makes that available. You guys have to orchestrate this stuff across multiple channels. Maybe talk about how you do that, how you orchestrate it, consistency of audience across multiple channels, and just kind of like what you've seen there over the last set of quarters.
Sure. Yeah. So that has been a unique challenge, especially kind of being, running the programmatic and social sides of the house that are typically operating, at times separately, but at best coming together. So knowing that, LinkedIn is unique where you can still kind of get that account level, but it is defined, as users are raising their hand versus a programmatic execution that relies on third-party partners. And then for a long time there, Reddit, Meta, that wasn't something that we could really stitch easily together. So being able to have a cohesive strategy and at its best form, align creative messaging and understanding how users are ultimately being exposed to the brand across each touch point. We've done a lot of research at Just Global about how users move through their day and the type of media consumption they have, and at what point they'll be most open to receive branding messaging versus something a bit more in the consideration phase. So that is a huge tool in our belt to be able to have the same audience being stretched and reported on. So I know we'll talk about measurement later, but one tool we use to kind of help connect those pipes too is a partner of ours, Octane 11. I know Reddit, you work together, Bombora, you work together. They are, really helpful for, kind of to what you're talking about, Matt, the account reach and how companies specifically are moving through the funnel and starting to tie those more demand gen, lower funnel metrics into a cross-channel strategy, which can be very challenging. But one example of kind of how this the curated ecosystem helps us move away from more static target account list marketing is one of our clients is Palo Alto Networks. We've worked with them for many years. We've gone through many versions of a strategy and target account approach. But this was an opportunity for us to essentially inject some life into their strategy. How can we, lift our eyes up a little bit? We're so in the weeds, so interested in product alignment and all this. How can we start to see see how research and intent is starting to influence companies that we may not be considering. So we were able to use the curated ecosystem audiences and compare them with a head-to-head test with the target account list from Bombora in both cases. So we also, what we were able to do is put the audience verification pixel on there, the AV pixel, and kind of understand how much overlap existed between the curated audience and the target account list that was more, just straight from sales. We actually saw a 25% overlap, which is huge, but also, 75% of that audience was new and would have gone, unreached otherwise. So it's kind of this interesting, clear indication that it's relevant, and there is some good meat to the original target account list, but there's a lot of opportunity out there that we were leaving on the table. So we did, we ran the test, we did the head-to-head, and we saw a 33% better site traffic rate with the curated ecosystem test, which was really exciting for us because as we're talking about those retargeting pools decreasing, how can we counteract that? How can we make sure we're still getting the best results out of our bottom of the funnel? So that was kind of, not to mention, we've talked a bit about how it's off the shelf or, ready to use in platform. It just cuts down on so much back and forth. And, when you're trying to test something new, for all my agency folks out there, it can be really difficult to sell something in, especially if it has a long lead time. So kind of the ease of use and the ability to kind of get that on a plan and get moving can be really critical when you're trying to change things up with a rather established client.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that last piece is that we're all day, this is on our mind. How do we make it easier? How do we make it faster? How do we make it simpler? And it's just a matter of kind of when, not if, at this point with the tools that are available to all of us. So that's exciting to think that we're really, in a lot of ways, the industry is still working with a lot of manual tasks. I mean, believe it or not, if we're all being honest. But all of that we will fix that. So that's really, to think that this can all get faster and better and easier is exciting. Just kind of tangential to this topic, but Kevin, would love to just kind of know, you guys are in a really interesting spot where I imagine a lot of brands, including some I know of, squarely put you into social, which you are. People are socializing and having conversations. But the opportunities and to have consistent audience across other channels that are not social and Reddit are there. And so from an audience planning perspective, it's an interesting thing. Where do you guys fall? You almost always dealing with social teams and social agencies, or are there times that you're brought into like a broader media bucket?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I feel like a lot of the difference, I think like, look, first and foremost, we recognize where we are in the social bucket. And I think it's kind of interesting because a lot of the social platforms will at different times, different reasons, sort of try to expand sort of beyond that. The core of what we do as it relates to marketing is in that social bucket. We're definitely starting to see some interest from other parts of the organizations, around search as it relates to coming in through different LLMs and things like this. There's a whole sort of new way of looking at what that marketing funnel looks like in the ecosystem. And, for probably more good luck than good planning, Reddit can be sort of at the forefront of that in a lot of ways. It's a very exciting time, and we're still kind of working through exactly what that means, both for Reddit and then for marketers on Reddit. But I think as it relates to kind of the data piece, what we're seeing is certainly there's real value to bringing these cross-platform strategies onto Reddit, or at least including Reddit in those cross-platform strategies, for a few reasons, right? Some of them mentioned like the ability to measure across the platforms gives you a great view into how effective or not the particular strategy or the particular campaign can be, which is obviously fantastic. I mean, we're all here to drive better outcomes for customers at the end of the day. The other thing for Reddit, because it is a little bit of a different social platform from kind of the more, call them traditional ones, although I suppose Reddit, in a lot of ways is one of the older ones in and of itself. But we do have a very unduplicated audience. Most of the users, or roughly half of the users on Reddit, aren't found on other social platforms on a monthly basis, which is kind of an interesting thing to find as you're planning the strategies. But we also see a really interesting dynamic happening. I think Christy mentioned it as well, where I think historically, or maybe like the default assumption, is that you're bringing a lot of this data in to sort of close the deal at the bottom of the funnel. And we're seeing a lot of success, not only across platform, as I mentioned, but up and down the funnel. Obviously, bringing different segments in for different reasons, but when you're bringing that sort of full funnel view, I guess full funnel and ultimately cross-channel view into what your campaign looks like, we're seeing phenomenal results across different industries on Reddit. So that's really exciting to see and something we're keen to explore going forward as well with partners like G2, Octane 11, and we're going to expand some of those measurement partners as well in 2026.
Yeah, we're seeing the same exact thing, where it feels like we spent 20 years or something begging people not to care about clicks. And it's almost, I'm thinking it just kind of quietly maybe started to happen. Where it's like, oh, wait a minute, mid and top funnel and branding is really important. These buyers, these key accounts, they need to know who we are. And if they don't, we're not going to have a chance to move them toward the bottom of the funnel. Like all of a sudden, it feels like we woke up and that was real. And I think, platforms like Reddit and across digital in general, it feels like B2B is having like a really good moment right now. Maybe for that reason, because it's not like programmatic's getting compared to lead gen. It's like there's been an embrace of like what programmatic can do or a channel like Reddit can do from a mid and upper funnel perspective. So it's an exciting time. I'm gonna kick it to Christine in a second on this cross-channel question. We leave a few minutes left, so any final questions, if you guys want to get them in, that would be great. But Christine, I know you talked about this a little bit. Talk about maybe like those different cuts of data that you mentioned earlier, the different altitudes at which you guys can make your data available, and how those get put into different channels. Like I imagine there's a specific type of your data that gets plugged into a sales use case versus maybe more of a mid-funnel use case. Maybe talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll just start with the most recent signal type that we have released. Last year, we released competitor signals. And that really shows you like who's researching your competitors, right? I think the lowest hanging use case for that is going to be for one, competitive displacement, and B, customer retention. If you've got a customer and they're checking out your competitors, like being a sales leader myself, I want to know that. I want to get ahead of that long before my renewal with the customer comes up, right? And so that signal has been really hot in being picked up and used in these sales workflows. We're starting to see a big increase in CS platforms demonstrating interest in using that type of signal to highlight a red flag for their CSMs users. And then early, like we were talking about, going more up funnel for branding and marketing use cases. I think this is one where historically we have never, we have something that's called category signals. And really what it is just visits to a category page on G2. And that is usually intended for buyers who don't exactly know what solution they're looking for. They kind of have an idea of their problem. And so they're really searching on the problem and then being given a list of products within a category that fulfills a problem that they're looking to solve. But it doesn't give you any signals of the product itself. Like it's just that category page, right? And so we've taken that a step beyond in working with Bombora. We now have these market signals available. And it's exclusively right now available through Bombora's curated ecosystem, where you can actually get all signals of visitors going to that category page and all products within that category page, right? And so that really shows you all buyers in market under a category. Which really gives you the opportunity to drive influence much earlier in the buying cycle. So perhaps they're not going to your page. They haven't found you yet, right? Perhaps you have a new product that is very nascent in market, and you haven't really generated the presence on G2 yet to use the behavior signals. That's okay. You can use the signals that's already been generated in the entire category to bolster and accelerate your entrance into market.
That's great. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Lots of different that's my takeaway from this. There's just so many different opportunities to test and learn with all of the data that's available and the way to deploy it across multiple channels. We're right at time. So I think we're going to call it there rather than try to kind of speedily move through one last question. But I want to thank you guys so much for joining. I know we're doing a lot of work together, and hopefully some people on the webinar are doing that work with us, and we can keep learning and iterating together. But thank you guys so much for joining.